Okay, and the second question I want you to write down is, what dream do you have for yourself? And I know a lot of students sometimes get confused. They're like, isn't that the same thing as a goal? Not necessarily. So with your goals, you have maybe the end point, right? You know, okay, this is going to happen in 4 years or 5 years or 10 years. But with your dream, sometimes it can take a little bit longer, but your dream can also be what's going to motivate you to get up in the morning, right? If you have down, oh, I want to pay down my debt, or I want to buy this thing. It's like, it's not really going to make you want to get up in the morning, go to work, work on focusing, paying down your debt. The dream can be something much bigger. And sometimes it usually involves other people, right? And most students will say, oh yes, I have a dream of going on a vacation with my family, or I have a dream of buying a rental property, or I have a dream of starting a nonprofit. And so being able to sit down and be like, what is that one dream that you want to accomplish? So write that down, be specific, and put a timeline. It's kind of great when I hear students come back and say, oh, I thought it was going to take me 10 years and I accomplished it in 2, right? So, and feel free to share in the chat box. I know it's very personal for most people, but when you share it with the world, guess what? There might be somebody watching like, oh, I can totally help you achieve that. Accountability is key. So take about 30 seconds to do that. Write those 2 down and put today's date too. It's going to be great for you to look back and be like, oh my gosh, this is what I wrote back in 2021. So go ahead and take 30 seconds to do that while I get my screen for you. Okay. All right. Give me a thumbs up if you see my screen. Perfect. Awesome. So now that you have those down, what is it that you want to do? Well, we're here because we want you to boost your financial literacy. What can you do to have better credit score? What is it that you can do to really make the right money moves? And the first thing I always tell people is kind of look at where you are, right? If we don't know where we're going, we don't really know where we're starting from, right? So it's kind of like when you're trying to get into shape, and you're saying, well, if I'm going to get into shape, I need to know what I need to do. Do I need to lose weight? Do I need to gain muscle? Do I need to, work on, working out differently? So it's kind of figuring out where you are today. And so I want to share some with you. The biggest thing I always see is runaway spending with students. It doesn't matter what age you are, right? Some of you might be returning back to college at an older age. Some of you are like, oh, you know what? This is my first time on my own. Runaway spending is the biggest area that I see students really struggle, right? So runaway spending can be those little fun luxuries, or sometimes just the everyday things that we need, right? So it could be the lunch, it could be, that coffee, that drink that we're looking for to have, right? And sometimes students will say, you know what, I do purchase a meal every single day, and it could be, the sandwich, the drink, and the chips that come with it. And then I have other students that say, oh my gosh, Natalie, I'm actually spending, breakfast and lunch, or sometimes dinner every day. And so these little things tend to trickle and add up, right? So if you're thinking, well, a few dollars here doesn't make a difference, I want to show you this example, because every single one of us, including myself, trust me, we have this runaway spending that we're like, wait, how did that happen? How did these few little dollars trickled into thousands? And the truth is, sometimes it has to do with what's going on in our lives. We're all still technically dealing through a pandemic, right? So figuring out how we can manage the way we deal with our money, right? How many of us, raise your hand, maybe bought something online maybe the last year and a half that you're like, wait, I bought more than I would have because I was at home, right? And sometimes, yep, we know, right? All of you are like, yes. So what happens is that becomes part of our runaway spending habit. So this example is that I want you to know is you can cut it in half, right? You can figure out what it is that you want to do with your money, right? And so with your food, and you're seeing right now, we have $10 a day, right? It's not something that most students say, well, how do I cut that in half? Well, let's go through this example. If you are spending Monday through Friday, right? Maybe you're on campus and you're buying your lunch with your friends. You're thinking, well, $10 a day is $50. It's not too bad for a week, right? You're like, it's something, but it's not too crazy. But when you start really multiplying that every single month, you're like, man, $200, that's something I can use towards my car payment, making sure I don't have any more debt, or pay down some of my debt that I currently have. It's these little things that add up. And then when we see the end of the year, $2,400. Well, let's be honest. Some of you are like, oh no, I spend $20 a day, right? Because, sometimes we're on the run and we're on the go, or maybe you had no idea that you were spending that much, and that can double easily to $5,000. And obviously, I only put it during the week, Monday through Friday. What happens on the weekends? Ooh, some of you are like, maybe I spend less on the weekends, but there's some people like, no, on the weekends, I see my family or my friends, and maybe I spend a little too much going out or socializing. And what happens at the end of the year? We're actually close to that holiday season, right? Uh-oh. It's the parties, right? It's the potlucks, it's the presents, it's the holiday spending, or maybe some of you travel back home or have people come and visit you, right? And that can get kind of expensive. So this is all little things that can trickle that we call runaway spending. And so when you're thinking like, do I really want to spend $5,000 or $2,400 on what I thought was one innocent meal? Well, like I said, is there a way that you can cut that in half, right? And how many of you, once in a while think, I can tell my friends, let's do a potluck once a week, right? That's something you could do. It's something simple. Or how many you're like, you know what? I can actually, instead, I can maybe cook a little more and have leftovers for the next day, right? And once you have those leftovers, you're like, okay, maybe 2 or 3 days out of the week is when you end up buying food at wherever you're at, right? And sometimes we need that to socialize. We have to network. And so I understand that, but maybe you can choose maybe one or every other day that you're going to bring food from home, or you're going to pack your lunch, or you're going to figure a way to cut down some of those costs. And if food isn't your runaway spending, it could be online shopping, right? How do you limit that? How do you have the conversation with other people? And we're going to talk about those awkward conversations about money next. Now, as a student, I love using this, and I tell anyone that even after they graduate, because if we look at our lives in quarters, it makes it a lot less overwhelming. It makes it a little bit more understandable. And I know this picture might seem a little small, but I'm going to go into a bigger. As you see, this is the college student budget template, and all of you are welcome to use this. I highly recommend you doing this at least the semester before. We're now in fall. And as you see here in the college budget, we break it down into monthly income and expenses. So just look at the first item that we have. The estimated monthly income is what you're going to put for any of you that have jobs, right? Any of you that have additional, side work that you're doing, any financial awards. So that can be financial aid, that can be not only scholarships, maybe you're in a fellowship, what you would include that as well, that you're receiving monthly, and then possibly you're getting money allowance from your parents, right? And then I put other income, because I know some of you already have your side hustles, maybe you do your babysitting on the side. You want to make sure you include that as well. And then you put the total, right? When you come up with that total, that's how much money you're actually bringing in. And it's pretty powerful when you start to see like, oh, I had no idea I had money coming from here. Or, you know what, maybe I should make sure that that money is coming consistently, right? So maybe taking in that extra shift that you thought wasn't a big deal. And then next we see the monthly expense for the month. So
hey, Natalie,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
the slides aren't moving on the screen. Like
oh, okay. Where did we last end up? Sometimes
we're still on the home page.
Oh, it is? Okay. Let's see.
Thanks.
On the very first homepage?
Yeah, we're on the intro to the deck.
Ooh, okay. So let's make sure. Let's see. Let's use this slideshow. How about now? Can you guys see some of the images?
We're on the runaway spending right now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll just kind of go through, but as you can see the pictures, right? We have some funky nails, sometimes some of those extra things that we're spending. We have the sandwich and the drinks, right? How do we cut this in half, right? Cut that runaway spending. Now you see this example, yes? So we see that it's 5 days a week, right? Monday through Friday, right? We said, or maybe some of you are like, well, I'm more at work and then I work on the evenings. I have school in the evenings. This can still pertain to you. And so what we see within a month, it's $200. And then we said $2,400. And I said, for many students, they'll come up to me and say, sometimes it's double, right? So $5,000 a year on what you thought was $10 a day can really trickle, right? And so in this college budget, can everyone see? Yeah. Awesome. So with this college budget, this is what's going to help you, one, understand where you're starting from and then where you are going to end up. Now, as we look a little bit deeper, the monthly expenses. Some of you are like, oh my gosh, just looking at alone, I have a lot more monthly expenses. I understand that. First thing, we got rent, right? Utilities, maybe your cell phone bill, maybe you got groceries, car expenses, you got student loans, insurance, medical expenses, credit card debt, entertainment, right? And entertainment, I know is really vague. And you can probably add another 10, I know I can, another 10 lines under that, because, you know, we think about streaming service, we think about maybe going to the movies, or, you know, travel could be included in that. What is considered entertainment for you, right? Laundry, miscellaneous as well, right? And for you, when you're doing this monthly expenses, it's important to be really honest with yourself, right? So if you're honest with yourself saying, okay, some things are a luxury and then some things are a necessity. And just by a show of hands, how many of you feel some of your streaming service is a necessity, not a luxury? And I have my hands up because the last time I saw so many students say, I can't, you know, I can't go anywhere, right? Because we're in a pandemic. I can't necessarily go to the movies freely like I used to. So they're online, whatever, they're watching documentaries and so forth. So you obviously will figure out what your values are and what is considered a necessity. And at the end, you'll find out there's some luxuries that you can do without or alternate. I don't want anyone to be like, oh, she's telling me that I need to stop eating out, stop having a fun time. Not at all. I want you just to really have an idea of what areas you can play around and change as you move along, right? So being, okay, you know, maybe a few meals here and there at home, or maybe having a conversation with my friends and say, let's do, you know, a weekly gathering at the park, or let's do hikes, something that doesn't necessarily cost any money. And this is where you can find at the very end, when you do your total, how much is your monthly expense? Now, if we look at the bottom of the page, how much is it semester of the cost, right? So we need to include tuition, books, lab fees, transportation, deposit, and transportation can be big as well, because sometimes it's not just the car, maybe it's the public transportation that you're taking. I know some of us take ride shares, and so include that as well, any deposits that you have to put for school and anything else that might be considered just for the semester. And then the last section is the really aha moment, I call it. It's, how am I doing, right? How are you doing? Is your monthly income making enough to pay for those semester expenses? And at the end, you'll see the difference, right? So you would subtract that from each other. When you're looking at it and say, okay, you know what? I'm breaking even. Maybe I can make a little bit more money, or maybe I can cut back on some of my expenses. This can go a real long way. And so understanding when you're doing this, try to do it the semester before. Right now we're in fall, it's just perfect time to do it. You just started school. And so this is a good time to just kind of go through and say, oh my gosh, okay, here's some of my expenses. And anyone that's watching this, are any of you maybe first time generation, raise your hand, or it's just been a while since you've been back in school, right? And guess what? So that means you're starting a new habit every day, new routines again. And so understanding that maybe your expenses will fluctuate. I know a lot of students will say, you know what, my summer semester, I don't spend that much money because I only take 1 or 2 classes and I work more. Or some students will say winter, fall, I definitely have a lot more expenses because I'm not working, or I'm, going to school full time. Whatever your situation is, make sure that you're consistently looking at your budget every other week if possible. And I explain to you how you can do that later on. But understanding that this little budget can go a long way, because then you can go back and say, I should start applying for more scholarships, or I should start, figuring out a way to cut back just a little bit. All right, so let's have a better image, because some students are like, wow, that was a budget. Some of us are feeling a little anxious when we talk about that, when we talk about managing our money. Well, let's talk about our mental health with that. As in the intro, she mentioned, I am an advocate, not just for financial literacy, but for mental health. And truth is, I always think for students particularly, there's just so much more that you have to handle, right? You're going to school, you're possibly working, you're probably responsible for other people, your family, you have all these obligations. And on top of that, you're trying to not only get the higher education so you can catapult your career to the next level, right? And so that can be a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. And so there's many things that we can do to make sure that we check in on ourselves with this mental health. And I don't know about all of you, but I know I've had, I think, a mental breakdown every other day, especially during pandemic, because we're trying to figure out what to do. And with student life, I think that's one of the things why we need to have these conversations with our friends and just check in. I love this little image by Asela, which gives you some of these fun things that you can do for yourself, right? How many you're like, oh yeah, I can sleep a little better. Maybe I can meditate, or I can write down how I'm feeling. I love to journal every day. It helps me just dump some of that negative critic within myself. I call it that saboteur, that person that's just telling me I can't do it, you know, writing it out. Also organizing. Some people feel like they like to clean, whether you're like Marie Kondo, trying to organize and tidy up, maybe that might relieve some of that stress. Also taking a break. It's simple as that. All of you, when we started, I had you write 2 things down, right? Maybe taking a break of writing down and saying, what is it that I want for myself? I have these cute little dollar signs, as you can see, and I write them. You could get them at the dollar store or somewhere, and just write down what it is that you want. And I keep it in my wallet. It's one of my favorite things, because every time I open up my wallet and either I'm going to spend something that maybe I don't really need, and I'm reminded like, wait, my goal is this, and I'm so close to it, but if I spend that amount of money, I'm less likely to follow through. So taking a break to say, how can I daydream? How can I enjoy this process? Obviously the obvious: working out, decluttering, having some tea, figuring out that mental health is an everyday challenge. As students, I know we forget that, right? It's kind of that you want to live up to everyone else's expectation, especially if you're first generation college student, especially if you're back in campus in college after a pandemic. So taking the time to say, you know what, I will make sure I hit one of those. And there's plenty of these little cute images that remind you, you know what, every day I'm going to make sure I'm incorporating one of those things. Because maybe you're like, I can't cook every day. Or, you know, I'm not going to have time to exercise every day. How can I maybe do it every other day and maybe incorporate something different, right? How many of you are like, yeah, I can totally do that. So with that said, I want you to write down 2 things that you're going to start doing every single day, something in the morning and in the evening, how you start your day and how you end your day. So some of you are like, I'm going to meditate in the morning and I'm going to journal at night, or vice versa. Take about 30 seconds to do that. And feel free to put it in the chat box too, because then we can see what other students are saying as well. Once you're done, all right, move on. All right, now I see everybody sitting down. You can do the sitting down, but it's a lot more fun when you're standing up. If you're in person, please put your phones down or anything that you have down and stand up. And if you're sitting down, try it as well. I like to do this, what I call money moves. I've been talking about, actually, let me take this down for a second. Okay. Now, when we are thinking about money, when we're thinking about how we feel around budgeting, or even just talking about our finances, how do we feel that sensitivity, right? So some of them are like, oh, I'm getting anxious just talking about it, or I'm feeling that maybe I could be doing something so much better. So what I like to tell students is figure out what money moves works for you, right? So how do you make this money move? So standing up, or like I said, get some of that movement. It's getting yourself out of this funk. Now, what I mean by that is movement. So our brains obviously learn through repetition. And maybe you are having a moment where you're about to go ask for a promotion, or you are really about to make a huge financial decision, but you need to make sure you're in the rational and right state of mind. So this is a real simple money moves that I like to tell people. And obviously it's a different experience when you're in person for those that are there really feeling it. So when you're standing up, it's really simple, but you're going to tap your shoulders. And if you're sitting down, try it as well. Just tap your shoulders. You're going to say I, and then clasp your hand like you're making something. I make, right? So it's I make, and then you're going to snap on both. Money moves, right? So it's I make, money moves, right? So keep trying, and you're saying the affirmation. You can change the affirmation wherever you want, but try it with me. So it's I make, money moves. I make, money moves. I make, money moves. Faster. Make, money moves. I make, money moves. I make, money moves. I make, money moves. All right, give yourselves a hand. Thank you so much for participating and seeing it all through the virtual. It also is just as cute and funny, right? How many of you felt silly doing it? Be honest. I totally get that. Great. So that's actually part of the point. When we are doing this, you were doing this for about not even 30 seconds. All of a sudden, I could tell half of you already like your shoulders were moving. This stress kind of just dropped for a second. You were smiling or you were laughing. You were feeling the sense of, that's light. And what it is basically it shocked you out of whatever was going on in your mind at that moment. And that movement, how can you not smile, right? How can you not feel like, okay, I don't have to be the world's greatest dancer. And I love doing this exercise when I'm in the car, when, like I said, maybe I'm about to go ask for a promotion or I'm about to do something that's really, really risky. Guess what? It just gets me centered. It gets me out of that focus and I don't care how silly it is. And obviously it's different. Those that are in person, you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I've done this same workshop and same dance in front of hundreds of people. And it's the funniest thing to see people just laughing and like, oh my God, I'm doing this wrong. But for those 30, 45 seconds, it automatically just show them like, oh, I can do that. You might have a very different affirmation. Maybe you're like, oh, I make money moves, or I'm a money magnet, or abundance comes to me, whatever works for you. It's the whole point is that no matter what you hear or what you say to yourself is going to change the way you feel about talking about money. And we all have that. We all have one song or something that automatically puts us in a good mood, right? And so I want you to take the time and do some kind of movement. You're welcome to use this one, but next time you do it, you might laugh and feel silly doing that. It's okay. Try it if you have kids or you're around other your friends. Be like, I want you guys to feel this. The energy can make such a big difference. So thank you for participating. And now I'm going to share that screen again. And for some reason, if it's not showing, please let me know. We're going to go ahead and do this. Share the screen. Alrighty. And we should be back on. Okay. All right. And so is everyone still seeing the image? 1 second.
Natalie, we still have you. We don't have the
Okay,
slideshow.
let me do that one more time. Okay, let's go back here. It's technical. While I'm doing this, I want you to write down 2 more things that you want to accomplish by the end of this month. So 21 days or 30 days is a new way to always incorporate a new habit. So you obviously said maybe you want to graduate, fine, but what is it that you're going to do in the next 21 days that's going to be different, right? And so incorporating some of these healthy habits, maybe write down what your affirmation will be. Let me see why it's not connecting. There we go, and should be sharing. Okay.
Yeah, we have the screen now.
Awesome. Okay, great. And that should be full. Perfect. Thanks for bearing, guys. Sometimes it's easy and sometimes the presentation is just something happens with it. All right. So as we saw here, with this, we see now, what do we want to do, right? So we're talking about some of these healthy habits that come along with it. What are the next goals that you have for yourself in the next 4 years, right? So making sure it's big this way. Writing that book, right? It might be graduating and going to grad school. So here is the next sheet that I want you to really pay attention to. I know, let's be honest, some of us are like, well, I'm graduating from college, or I'm, so close, but I also have debt. And if you have debt, that's okay. But understanding that debt does not define who you are. It just means that some things happened to you that you had to use extra money, right? So if you're looking at this financial sheet, you see that it's basically a goal sheet to help you not only pay off the debt, but stay focused on what you have currently acquired, right? So I'm going to give you an example here. You can see the American Express, right? You can
nothing's showing, Natalie.
Oh, nothing's showing? Huh. Okay. Oh, let's see. Sorry, 1 sec. It's showing that I'm sharing the screen, but nothing's showing.
Well, no, it's showing now, but when you go to do play from current slide, it like glitched, so it didn't pop up.
Oh, okay. So it's showing
So
now that
like,
you see the 4 line items.
well, I'm seeing it, but it's not in the big form. It's still in the smaller
Oh, and the
version.
small. Okay, let's see. Let's see why it's not.
Okay, there it is.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So with that, we see we have American Express, we have student loans, and American Express, any credit card that you might have, a car loan or parent loan, right? So, and I'll explain a little bit the parent at the end. If you have a credit card, most likely those are the ones that have the highest interest. So I always tell students, you want to make sure that you're listing it from the one that has the highest debt. So if it has the highest debt along with the highest interest as well, because credit cards usually will have typically higher interest rate than anything else. Then goes your student loan, possibly if you have a car loan or any other type of loan, usually those interests are much lower. The last one I put parent loan because some of you are getting money from your parents, but it's important to have that conversation with them and say, you know what, I also have other debt that I'd like to focus on paying off first because the interest does accumulate, right? So if you're focusing on the one with the lower interest rate, that means you're going to be paying a lot more in the end. So what you start doing is what we call this is a snowball effect, right? So with this is that you start paying off every single month as much as you can with the American Express. You're going to pay off at least the minimum amount. And often students will come to me and say, wait, I'm going to pay, but I can't pay my minimum payment this month. Maybe I'll pay double next month. And I always tell them that's the biggest mistake most people do, especially when they have credit card debt, is they feel, well, if I'm doubling up on payments the next month, it'll offset whatever I missed the month. And you have to stay consistent. You have to be completely consistent with paying your bills. Even if you can't pay it off at the end of the month, making sure you're paying that minimum payment will go a long way. So how do you prevent, managing, and eliminate any of those bad financial habits? It sounds easier, right? So you're like, how am I going to be able to do this, right? It's taking one day at a time. It's very difficult for some of us to say, well, today I'm going to work on my money. I'm going to work on my personal finances. And by tomorrow, I'm going to be a guru. That's not how it happens, right? We wish it did, but it takes time. And as mentioned in my intro, obviously I'm an advocate for financial literacy. It's because I felt I never had that for myself going into college. Not just because I was a first generation college student, but I felt there wasn't any resources and I felt very alone in the process. Many of us sometimes goes through that where you're thinking, I'm not going to be able to get through this, or I'm not going to be able to pay down my debt or fulfill some of those goals, and not having someone to talk to. For me, when I was in college, my second year of grad school is not only did I find myself with now $40,000 in debt, I was about to take out another student loan, and I just felt so overwhelmed by it, as well as the moment that I found out I had lost my job. That was during the last market crash. I also had a nonprofit, and the responsibility that I wouldn't be able to financially keep that nonprofit going was very difficult. So one of the things that I was going through was not only feeling ashamed, but I was feeling embarrassed. I was feeling extremely hopeless and alone. And sometimes as students, some of you are like, oh yeah, I know how that feels, right? Because you have those moments of sleepless nights where you're like, how am I going to pay for this? Or how am I going to manage to figure out how to get out of this? For me, during that time, it was really difficult, and I fell into a very deep depression. Depression shows up in all of us very differently. So that's why I always tell students to check in on yourself, check in with your friends, and find out how you feel during that. Because for me, I thought depression was just someone sad all the time. And for me, I've dealt with depression most of my life. And for me, it showed up in different ways. I was easily agitated. I was crying by myself. I didn't know why. I felt a little hopeless. I was frustrated, and at times I was extremely sad, and I started to crave sugars. I just didn't feel social. And these little things started to really add up. And because I didn't know that I can talk to someone about this, or I didn't know that I can get, therapy, and on campus, you have so many resources. So I always tell students, please talk to not only your professors, but there's so many programs just like this. The fact that you have this workshop, I'm extremely grateful to be part of this, because if my university would have had something like this, it would have really helped me how to handle and deal with my own debt, right? And deal with my own financial struggles. Many of us might even have generational trauma dealing with money, right? Because maybe we're like, oh my gosh, my parents had all this difficult, situation going through this. How do we go through and change our mindset? And I talk about depression as a difficult situation that many of us go through every day. But the truth is, it's something that we have to challenge ourselves to become a little bit better. And when I share my story, I started doing this, teaching students how to pay down their debt. And for the first few years, I didn't talk about depression and mental health. And when I started to realize most students were also dealing with that, that's when I became vocal and shared my story. About 8 years after it happened, during that time that I lost my job, feeling so much debt while I was in grad school, I found myself in one of the most difficult situations. I was in an acute psychiatric hospital. And for me, I never thought that could ever happen to me. I felt so alone, and I kept on asking myself, how did this happen to me? And technically, usually I always tell people I'm pretty optimistic, I'm always happy or something, but it can happen to anyone. And when it comes to our money, when it comes to our relationship with it, it's probably one of the most powerful relationships we have, whether you want it to be or not. And I always tell people, whether you have money or you don't have it, it can be extremely difficult, right? And so understanding that, for me at that time, it was so difficult, but luckily I had the support. I went to therapy. I wish I would have gone to therapy beforehand. I started having these conversations with my family, and that really made the change on what it is I wanted to do to make sure that other students don't go through what I do. And if any of you have found yourself in that situation where you're like, oh my gosh, yes, you were part of them, you had a mental breakdown or you were in a hospital, it's going to be okay. There's resources out there, and I'll talk about a lot of the free resources that you can also connect with, but understanding that you're not alone, that it's a very common feeling. And if you're feeling that, it's important to get the help that you need, right? Because like I said, it's a daily battle sometimes. And when we do start challenging ourselves and saying, I can do this, then we do better because we learn from our mistakes. And so that's my biggest thing, why I love teaching that. So one thing I want to ask you is, do you initiate the conversation about money with others? Right? Do you ever say, yeah, I'm going to call up my parents and say, hey, do you have a will? Or, how are you guys financially? Or, I need help. Well, most of us avoid that. Start to figure out, how can I start having that conversation? What are the things that I would like to know from my family or my friends? What should they know about me, right? Earlier, I said, maybe some of you can save some money by having a potluck. Have that conversation. When you speak up and say, you know what, guys, I don't want to be spending as much money going out. Another friend of yours might be like, thank you so much for saying that. I really wanted to say that, but I was afraid. So sometimes we have to have that courage to do so. Do you wait for someone else to bring it up? And ask yourself that, oh yeah, that's been me. I want you to start being more courageous and vulnerable and start this conversation for you. And lastly is, do you avoid all conversations when possible around money? If that is the case, then this is why you're here. This is why you're investing time to be here during this workshop is, okay, I need to get past my fear, because it's not only going to help me, but it's going to help other students. And last, did your money story change how you talk about money? So you're like, what is my money story? So now I'm going to have you do an activity. I want all of you to close your eyes, and you're going to follow my voice. I'm going to walk you through this vision activity, put what you're doing down. And I can't bite you because I'm not there, so you're good. Keep your eyes closed. And what you're going to do is you're going to inhale for 3, you're going to hold for 3, and then you're going to release for 3. And we're going to do this 3 times. Typically, you actually can do this 8-8-8. It's a very common breathing exercise. And with this 8-8-8, it helps you to relax. It helps you to feel less anxious, and it can help you bring down your heart rate. But for the time purposes, we're going to do this 3 times, and we're going to do 3, 3, 3. So go ahead and take a deep breath and inhale. Hold. 2, 3. Release. Inhale again for 3. Hold. Release. One more time. Inhale. Hold. Release. Keep your eyes closed. And I want you to remember the first time that someone in your home was paying bills. What did that look like? Were you a kid? Did you join in the conversation? Was it your parents or your caregiver? Were they in the kitchen? Was there papers everywhere? Did you leave the room? What was the energy during them paying their bills? What was the energy after? Was there any conversations about managing their money. Okay, I want you now inhale again and hold for 3. Inhale, hold, release. Keep your eyes closed. Now I want you to fast forward and remember the first time you paid your bills. What did that feel like? What energy did you bring? Did you set yourself up at the table? Did you have your papers? Did you have everything you needed? What type of energy did you bring? Did you have anyone else joining the conversation about what you were doing, paying those bills? How did you feel afterwards? Okay, I want you to do one more inhale, hold, and release. Keep your eyes closed. Now I want you to fast forward today, present time. You are investing in yourself. You are taking the time to make the right money moves. You're connecting with your university. You're connecting with other students. You're going to have those conversations with your family and friends because you are courageous and strong enough to be the financially savvy person that you want. You're taking the time to be the best money maker. All right, open your eyes. Thank you for participating in that. As many of you were feeling this, a lot of you felt some of that, right? Just the shoulders drop. All of a sudden your heart started to race a little less, right? You felt a little less anxious going through those breathing exercises. I urge you to do this anytime before you're about to pay your bills or you're going to make a big financial decision. Maybe you just need, or maybe you're feeling anxious. Breathing exercises can go a long way. But this one also helped me, hopefully helped you to understand what your money story is. And one of my favorite stories was a student came up to me and said, oh my gosh, my money story was during this breathing exercise that he remembers vividly running with his dad at the end of the street every month to pay the electric bill. And he said it was always till the last minute before they would shut off their electricity. And he was now in his 50s. He was an engineer. And he said for so long, he had no idea why every time he had to pay the bills, he felt he procrastinated. He waited towards the very end. Sometimes he got stuck paying bills late. So that meant he ended up paying extra fees. And he told me, he's like, Natalie, I actually had the money to pay that. And I didn't have to feel this frustration of procrastination or having to hurry up. And it had to do with everything because he remembers doing that at 8 years old. And little did he know he carried that throughout the decades. And that's how he paid his bills. So sometimes it's rooted within us that we had no idea. But knowing that you can change the next chapter makes the difference. Now, I want to tell you, it's time for you to have a date with yourself. Paying the bills. You're like, a date with myself. Yes. Every month, most of us have bills, right? So paying the bills can be having a fun time with you and dating, but how do you date yourself, right? You're thinking, if I go on a date, I don't want to pay bills. But this is a process that I recommend everyone to do, especially if you are trying to make sure that you understand what it is that you're doing every month with your finances and your bills. Every time you get your mail, I want you to make sure that you collect it every single day and toss out what you don't need, right? So throw any spam and open them right away. I know sometimes students will tell me, well, I put everything in I get my mailbox and I put everything in a basket. And then at the end of the month, when I'm paying my bills, I take everything out. Well, one, you're prolonging that whole date experience because that means you have to go through tons of stuff. If you get rid of the junk mail right away, then you are left with maybe 1 or 2 bills really. And you open them, you can see if there's action that needs to be done, right? You're going to throw away anything that does not serve purpose for you, and creating an action pile and a file pile. Because sometimes you're just getting maybe a statement that just shows confirmation that your payment was made, that it's done. And the second can be, oh, well, I need to make sure I pay this on time so I don't get stuck with any late fees. And then also designate a pay area station. I like these little boxes that you can get anywhere, or I used a shoebox for many years. So feel free to find something that is just designated. And in that, so I'll show you real quick, you have your calculator, you have, whatever it is that you use to pay your bills. I pay most of my bills online, but I asked all my banks, all my credit cards to make sure I always get paper statement. And I know a lot of people are like, that's so old school. I'd rather not have the paper, or the banks will try to tell you, save the trees. let's be honest. Many of us, if we get email, it becomes spam. Or we think we'll look at it and we file it away. But when you have it hard copy, it's important for you to go through every line item and say, okay, this makes sense. Then you can find out if you're getting double charged or something, if there's any fraudulent activity happening on your cards and your statements. And I mentioned having a calculator handy, and I know a lot of you are like, but my phone has a calculator. The thing about having your phone, it is distracting, even if it's just a date with yourself for half an hour. So I want you, when you do that, is that you are going to put your phone and lock it away for whatever 30 minutes to an hour, however long it takes you to pay your bills. But once you do that, you can focus and use a calculator when needed. Also, think about the energy and the environment that you're creating. So if you are about to do that, can you make it more enjoyable? Like, I like to have like tea. I like to have some music. Maybe you have some incense. A lot of students will say, oh, I love paying my bills in my pajamas, whatever makes me feel more comfortable. And guess what? You start to enjoy the process a little better. And at the end of the day, I want you to treat yourself. You heard me right, treat yourself. You're like, how will I do that? I don't want you to spend more money on crazy stuff, but maybe it's something that you will only do for when you pay your bill. So some students will say, oh yeah, my favorite thing is this dessert place, an ice cream shop. I only go once or twice a month because that's when I do with my bills. And that's the way I treat myself. Some students will say, oh, I'll do a bath, whatever it is that you only do after you take a date with yourself paying your bills. Because then what happens is you start to program yourself that you start enjoying the process. And for me, I always tell students, I get it. Sometimes you look at your statement, you're like, why did I spend so much money? But then now I look at a statement and say, you know what? I spent money, but I helped someone have a job, right? I helped someone provide for their family. And you know what, those experiences, I needed that, or I needed to make sure it was taken care of. And then you come from a place of abundance as opposed to a place of scarcity, right? When we start to feel like we're not having enough, it makes it really difficult to get past that, right? So having this date for yourself, trust me, next few times you start paying your bills, you're going to enjoy the process and say, oh yeah, this is going to be a lot easier. Because I want all of you to think this way. If I know how to manage $1, I can manage thousands and millions of dollars to come. And all it takes is learning how to manage that first dollar, right? Too often I hear students say, well, I'm going to wait for my accountant to do it or someone else to do it. Guess what? Then you never learn how to manage it. So taking this time to have a little date with yourself can go a long way. All right, the financial do's and don'ts. We don't have enough time to go through everything, but I wanted to give you some of the top ones that I know a lot of students tend to miss. Contact your university, right? Ask the questions with your financial aid office, whoever your counselor is. Ask them what there might be something that they have for you, right? Maybe there's scholarships or fellowships that you had no idea were available to you. Next is, do specify any unusual expenses or anything that has changed in the last year. How many of you have felt, oh my gosh, yeah, the pandemic, right? Maybe some of you moved back home. Maybe you are now have a roommate. It's important to let your financial aid know that what has changed in your circumstances. Maybe you've lost a job, or maybe you have different income coming in. So these are the things that I want you to make sure that you have that in place. Also, making sure that you know that it's not just free money, right? You're responsible for any student loans that you get. However, if you have scholarships or fellowship, most of them you don't have to repay. Well, obviously you pay taxes with them, but understanding that when you are given money, it's that responsibility, but also making sure that you're on top of those areas. Now, don't use financial aid to overspend, right? Sometimes I hear students say, oh yeah, I got this. And then I ended up paying for, buying a screen TV or something that was not helpful for you, right? So making sure that you are responsible in what you're going to be spending. And also don't use your credit card the same way you would use your debit card. And I can't express that enough, is because sometimes students get those two confused. But with your debit card, it's a set amount that you're putting into, right? Any income that you have. And then your credit cards, you have certain limits. And I'm going to show you a quick graph on how you can really boost up your credit score. So let's go here. And if you get a chance, I wanted to put that in there too, but making sure that you get a moment to figure out what is your language with financial literacy, right? That's the TEDx talk on it. But some common financial literacy terms that I want you to keep in mind is the APR, right? Annual percent rate. So what is that? It's the yearly interest charged on borrowed money. So sometimes students will be like, I don't know, they might have 2 or 3 credit cards and each credit card has a different APR. So it's important for you to know which one is what your student loans, what your credit cards, what type of interest is being charged on a yearly basis. Another term I like to put is assets, right? So any resources that can be tangible, that you can own and control, and basically that you can convert into money, right? How many of you have ever sold something on like OfferUp, Craigslist, all these different platforms, right? And it's because there are certain assets that you can resell. And so understanding that you are making the right decisions when you're purchasing something because it's worth value that maybe you can resell later on. And then I'll just show you a few others. Your credit score. How many of you, raise your hand, know what your credit score is currently? Awesome. If you don't, it's okay. But I always recommend get to know your credit score at least once a month, right? So, excuse me, at least 3 times a year. And you can check it free. And there's so many different websites for that, but it's basically going to help you represent where you are as a borrower, right? So it's a type of scale from 300 to 850. Now, what's the creditworthiness? What does that mean? This is a term that lenders will use to see if you are basically a good borrower, right? They want to know that they have faith in you, that you're going to be able to pay back and repay that loan. And last is, what's that principal, right? So what's the principal amount is the money due on the loan before the interest. Some of these terms, sometimes you might hear them and not often know what they are. And I always tell students, if you could do 20 minutes out of your day to learn a few terms here and there, you're going to start using them not only in your vocabulary, but you're going to start looking out for other things that can make more for you. Like, oh my gosh, am I doing this to become better creditworthiness? Or am I going to make sure that my credit score is at its top point? What this looks like. So once you figure out what your credit score, you become this, what we call the ideal person to lend money to. But why would you want to have enough money now? Why would you want to invest in something later, right? So why invest early rather than later? So I'm going to show you this example. This is between 2 people, right? And so whether you have a 401k with your job or Roth IRA or starting one, this is something that is extremely powerful based on age. So it doesn't matter when you start. If you're 40, 50, 20, as long as you start is important, right? But here in this example, the difference with someone that just started off, Danny started investing in his retirement account. And this is a very conservative, but pretty good return for 10%. And he was investing for 8 years in a row. As you can see, he was investing $2,000 per year. And for some reason, he stopped after the 8 years because he wanted to spend it on other things or whatever he decided. But because he kept that account, it started to incur compounding interest. So he started to make more money as the years went by. Now, Natalie at age 27 is when she barely started investing in her retirement and started to invest the same amount, which is $2,000 every single month. But the difference is she had to continue to invest years, decades later compared to Danny, and Danny still came out with more money in the end. A little over $1 million, right? And sometimes people are like, what? That is mind-blowing. The truth is, because compounding interest is it's accruing money on your own money. And I always tell people, it's like, think about your money having money for you, money, and maybe more babies and babies of money, right? And so when that happens, then you don't have to work as hard for it, right? So starting early and figuring out where you can save some of that money. Many of you are like, okay, yeah, I already found out that I'm going to cut my runaway spending. So maybe that half of the money that you were spending on that meal, you're going to use that towards investing, right? You're going to put that towards your future and not touch it, right? This is the place that you're going to make sure that it continues to grow. Here are some fun resources, right? I know I'm giving you a lot of information, but I want you to know that if there's something that you like to do, I know like students that like to watch videos, they prefer podcasts, they prefer books. There are 2 types of movies that I love to recommend to students that I think they're fun and easy to get through. And it is, I want to actually go through that first. It's Boom Bust Boom. And it's a documentary that just kind of goes over what the economy looks like, how it's run, and how our markets work too. And there's tons of puppets, there's great scholarly people in there as well, and cartoons, and they just make it fun for you. And maybe some of you have already seen The Big Short. It's with Stephen Carell and all these funny people, comedians. Somehow they made this into a comedy, but it's based on what happened before the crash last. And I highly recommend people to watch that, because I think that's so important to know what to do, what you don't want to be falling into, especially when there is a market crash. And make sure you check in. There's so many YouTube videos and podcasts out there, obviously my own too, that can help you increase your financial literacy. Now, I wanted to show you this quick score. So what makes up the credit score? We were talking about creditworthiness, right? So what do lenders look at? If you're looking at this pie chart, there's 5 different areas that they're going to look at. And honestly, I usually just do a whole workshop on the actual credit score, but with time, I wanted to give you some of the top 2 things to look for, right? So the number 1 thing that they will look at that will make up the best part of your credit score is your payment history. And that's 35%. That makes up 35% of your credit score. So think about that. If you have multiple credit cards, if you are paying the monthly, at least the minimum amount every month, they'll know that your payment history is consistent. That means that you're reliable, that you're responsible, and that you're not, defaulting on any of your payments that are needed. So 35% is a big deal. So making sure that every time you pay it on time. The other section is number 2 is you're owing what you owe. So the amount owed is about 30%. So 30% of that, you're like, wait, what does that mean? So let's say you have a credit card limit of $10,000, but you're only using $3,000, that's 30% of that usage. They want to know that you're not maxing out your credit cards, that you're overspending and that you owe money to everyone, right? And so it's important to know that these are the 2 areas that your credit score will make up of. And the other fear, this is important, but not as incremental to it. You'll see that your types of credits also are important. Students will come to me and say, should I have a credit card or should I have, is it a credit card or the debit card? Which one's better, right? Technically, they both have different benefits and obviously the pros and cons to each. But if let's say you do have a credit card, it's sometimes the easiest way to boost up your credit score. And the type of credit is really important. I always tell students, stay away from opening, credit cards from department stores or, basically something that's not going to help your credit score. And so if you're applying for multiple loans at one time, that can also hurt too. So making sure that you space it out. So the type of credit is going to be important. It's only 10% of that. The length of the history. So some of you are like, wait, I'm just starting out. I'm building my credit. Your history means that you might not have any yet. So it's going to take some time to build some of that history. So the moment you're like, oh, okay, yes, I applied for an apartment, or I got a car loan, or I just got my first credit card, all those things will add up, and which is good because the longer history you have, then creditors can say, oh, wow, Natalie's been doing this for 20 something years and she's been consistent with her payments, right? And so that'll be the length of history. And last is any new credit, right? So like I said, you don't want to go up and try to open a credit card in every department or any other place that you have. And so that makes up 10% of that. With that said, is understanding that your credit score does not define who you are either. I always tell students, I know sometimes you ask someone what their credit score and they're like, I'd rather tell you how much I weigh than how much my credit score is. And the truth is, it's because it brings some shame to you think, oh, it's how I am. And it's not. It doesn't define who you are. However, it does tell you what's going on in your financial life, right? So that means, are you going through a hardship? If you've lost loved ones, if you lost a job, if you're going through something difficult, sometimes that emotional side is connected to it and you might overspend, or maybe you can't afford to pay certain bills. This is why it's important to know to keep an eye on your credit score, and also to know that there's fraudulent activity that might be happening. And if you keep an eye on that, you can look out for any red flags possible. And knowing that you can always change your credit score, you can always fix it. It's better to know that you're doing the right habits, including some of those things, to make sure that you are increasing your credit score as you go along. Now, I know some of you might have some questions, and if you have, please put them in the chat box. I just want to make sure we get some since we're running almost out of time. And if there's a way that maybe some of you are like, oh, I want to ask you a question, but I'm too afraid to ask in front of everyone, always feel free to reach out. You can send me a message. I'm on Instagram, all those social media platforms as well. But there is so many resources out there that you can now start getting that information. And like I said, check in with your university. The fact that Goodwin is putting these type of workshops for you is because they want you to not only continue investing in your future, but they want to make sure that you have all the resources that you need. Now, before I leave, I want to thank you all for your time and investing in being here, but also to remind yourself that you are your ancestors' wildest dreams come true. And I know that might seem a little cheesy, but I had to put this picture of my grandfather. He passed away about 3 years ago. And I think about all the sacrifices that our parents, our grandparents, and people well before us have made. And where we are today, we have all these amazing opportunities. And Goodwin is doing the best that they can to make sure you achieve those goals. and thanking them, because that's part of my goal. Is I want to make financial literacy a universal language. I don't want someone to ever feel that they don't have the right tools to make the right money moves and to feel less alone. And I wanted to share a little funny, last year I got featured in Forbes, but the fun thing about that is I would have never thought that being a mental health advocate and financial is something that people want to hear. So the fact that you're here today is, guess what? Not only you're interested in this, your family and friends are interested, but they don't have the access that you might have. So now you get to go home, make those changes and talk to your communities and really make real change in what you're going to do. Any future that you have for yourself that is going to be a great financial future is going to affect everyone in your family and in your community. So I thank you for being a part of that. And I see, oh, thank you so much for all the lovely chats. And I see people want to buy a house and you know, all these things. These are great goals to have. And someone mentioned earlier, you can get my books all through Amazon as well, but there's free resources as well. And I'm always a big advocate for that, listening to different podcasts. And please let your university know, let them know that this is needed. And like I said, a lot of these topics, I can talk for days on this, right? But it's so important to say, you know what, today, all of you learned at least 5 new terms. And you not only learned at least 5 new habits, you figured out, oh my gosh, my money story needs to change, or, you know, what it is that I'm going to do every day to keep some of that mental health and have those conversations. Thank you so much for having me. This happens to be Hispanic Heritage Month as well. So it's wonderful to see representation everywhere. Thank you for this. Make sure you keep investing in yourself. Keep me posted on your success. And remember those goals that you wrote down for yourself with today's date. Not only will you get there, but I want you to make sure you check in with us, share us, and tell us what you've been up to, because it means the world to all of us. So thank you so much, and stay financially savvy because you are on your way. Thank you. And if there's any other questions, let me know. Feel free to reach out.
Anybody have a question in here?
Yes, go for it.
I just asked the audience, Natalie.
Anybody else? Oh, okay. I'm checking on the chat box so far, no questions.
No questions in here.
Oh yes, one of the questions to share the PowerPoint, I'd be happy to, and I can send that as well.
I think we're good, Natalie.
All right, well, thank you everyone, and hope to
Thank you.
hear some great successes in the future. Thank you for having me.
Thanks,
Thanks so
Natalie.
much. Talk to you soon.
Bye.